new cabinets next week, and then pick out countertops too. So. I'm going to say 12 weeks because it'll probably take me that long to do it. Yeah.
How you doing, man? Vertical.
That's a great start.
Being vertical is a bonus.
Kitchen first, and I'm going to take actually everything out of the shower, and I'm going to do one of those open showers with no doors, no walls that you just step into. That's what I want to do. Although I'm a little concerned that the dogs may want to come in there with us, but we'll see what happens. Yeah, really.
Just do not jump in the middle of that conversation.
I can see giant Bubba going, oh, it's a water reindeer.
So young lady, are you Bethany's replacement? Temporarily. Hey, I just ran over her.
That sucks. I vote no.
I don't think that's on the agenda.
Oh, that don't mean nothing. No, we can vote. I have an opinion. I'd like to share it.
Right. I'm sure there'll be
Yeah. You're
You
not going
end
that
up with those
far.
land use meetings.
You're not going that far.
Yeah. So, good.
So what are you going to be doing up there?
Regulatory affairs.
Exciting.
Yep. Yeah. Where's my dog money? I've gotten beyond patient. Yeah, I'm done. I've been
She
trying
didn't
to
want you to
raise
think
money for
please was a sign
9
of weakness.
years.
She was actually pretty adamant.
Oh, I always turn them off when I replace the battery, because otherwise they'll like freak out.
Because I was just like,
Yeah.
where's my damn dog? The please wasn't really happening. There'd be a
Is it going in?
on the front end.
Sometimes you just have to, yeah.
Appreciates my blood.
Appreciating and just expecting.
Yeah.
I wouldn't know how to act, if I wasn't being reminded that, we're,
Things don't work the way they expect.
So, what's true story? What's the process? I knew what the process was way back when I was looking for dollar money on your side of the table, but I don't know what it is. I mean, how does it have to be essentially manage that income, or how do they do it?
yes, and that's where it's getting screwed up.
Okay.
It used to be before that, when the installations put in a DAR request, it was evaluated, once it was determined to be viable and approved, certified, important international defense, all that stuff.
Yeah.
Then, SDEC,
Right.
at the time, I guess it was NITNIC, but it was changed over to SDEC, they took ownership of it. And they shepherded it through the whole process of funding, were able to get a lot more dogs in the farm than now the process is that once it's certified, it goes back to the installations, and then we have to send it up to INCOM as a no-com request.
See, he's explaining this to me, but I don't understand it like he does.
Grown up to talk.
And then it
So it competes
competes with all
it competes
the
with
other
other.
no-com.
If it's current mission, so it's not a new mission or anything like that, it doesn't get any kind of special
Right.
way out of your middle money.
Whereas before, when SBC was out there looking at jabbing for us, they could get approved. But now it's like, INCOM looks at it, goes, it's a transportation project.
Right. In the meantime, we gotta build barracks, so barracks that transportation money, you're in the same, actually, barracks would carry more weight.
And,
They type it in the middle.
come on, we understand, got it, those trains, and
involvement with Karen.
But you don't need the dollar on your key card?
It's like, really?
That's the one,
So,
sorry. Charter Oak? Done.
I don't think your person was here at the board meeting.
I mean, you guys have been
So,
bending over
why
backwards
did
to
it
try and
destroy
keep
the
this thing
person was
going.
here? So,
You know, in the meantime,
if you hear something.
I don't know if we have to be at
Afternoon, Jason.
Hey, how you doing?
Doing good. You over here all by yourself?
Well, last time I wasn't, so I'm assuming somebody else was gonna show up and sit over here, but I could be wrong.
Well, Brian Vituli, the chair, should be here. And that's where he always sits.
Who's that?
Some guy.
Some guy.
He just shows up and
See,
takes
I was-
control.
You know, I wanted to give him a little support sitting over here.
Appreciate that.
I mean, everyone else did.
Yeah, there've been a few times when he did sit over here all by himself.
I mean, you don't smell bad or anything. I know that.
Before I got here, so before I pictures.
Second, okay, sure.
it wasn't until the draft.
Hell, they didn't leave us much room behind here, did they?
Yeah, it's
Looked
a
like the
little
room
tight.
got moved this way a little bit.
Yeah.
And they
Today is Beth's last meeting. She has a substitute learning the ropes. So if we could ask whoever's making motions and seconds and stuff to state their name.
Sure, sure. Yeah. Yeah, sounds good.
So that's when we had been talking about in town prior to that. But once that study came down, then we were actually, we had some ammunition.
So do you have to recompete each time you do your no conservation?
It has been the number one transportation project in the Army for history.
Really?
Not just for person.
No, the whole Army.
Not just for cars, Army,
Right, but it's not the number one no conservation, it's the number one transportation.
number one transportation.
So it doesn't go up.
Which means that in the no-con list, it's,
Yep, Central Ocean, your friend. Like, we got local business fund.
and certainly up to a certain level, once it exceeds, I think we're at the project cost is over $1 million because of no-con.
Now you understand that?
I do, I got it, I'm saying exactly.
That's what, you can
Yeah, so
like, all right,
it's about $1 million.
I'm getting
He doesn't resubmit it. I'm just walking. Watch this. I can step my legs like
Unlike some of us.
unlike some of us do that. Getting better. I think he must like that.
Yeah, I think they've done that. Remember,
Good afternoon, everybody. The sooner we start, the sooner we can not be here. No offense, but welcome to the February 15th, 2018 Transportation Advisory Committee meeting. This meeting's called to order. We have a quorum, and let's start with introductions.
Jason Dosh, John Palmer Lake.
Larry Manning, Town of Monument.
Anton Manage, Pasco County.
Victoria Chavez, El Paso County.
Wendy Pettit, CDOT Region 2.
Ken Prather, PPACG.
Deborah Baumgartner, USAFA.
Rick Orphan for Carson.
Randy Williams, City of Fountain.
Taylor Hearn, City of Manitou Springs.
I'm Brian Vituli with the City of Colorado Springs Mountain Metro Transit and staff.
Bethany Schumer, PPACG.
Jessica Bechtel, PPACG.
Jennifer Valentine.
Okay.
Please make sure your blue light is on for the blue light special.
And another housekeeping item, when we're making motions and seconds today, please announce your name. Apparently, Bethany is not going to be with us any longer after tomorrow, and Jessica will be taking her place. So if it would help Jessica with learning who we are and who's making the motions and the seconds. So thank you. Agenda approval. Everybody have a chance to review the agenda, and are there any changes recommended? If not, could I have a motion, please?
Victoria Chavez, move approval.
Is there a second?
Anton Ramage, second.
All right. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, thank you. Item 3, public comments for any items not on the agenda. And it doesn't look like we have anybody in the audience. Sorry, you'll have to wait. No, go ahead.
I guess I'll come up so you can hear me. Jennifer Valentine, PPACG staff. So you probably already received an email from Jessica, press release at some point, but I just wanted to reiterate that we did just release our needs survey, so we're trying to get a feel for public perception of needs in our region, things like maintenance and safety and congestion, and so we have a survey online that walks people through that. I do have a stack of postcards here, and there's some more on the table. We're getting more printed, so if you are so inclined, please take a handful and help us spread the word by handing them out, leaving them at your front desks. And if you did receive the email, feel free to pass it along that way too. Any questions about the survey? Has anybody taken it yet?
Yes.
Brian, good job.
Thanks.
All right, thank you.
Has there been a good turnout so far? Or?
I'm not sure actually.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's still in the first 2 days.
Okay. All right, item 4, approval of the January 18th TAC minutes. Has everybody had a chance to review them, and are there any revisions? And if not, could I have a motion to approve?
Move to approve, Victoria.
And a second? Don't be shy. All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, thank you. Item 5, the Board of Directors report from Wednesday's board meeting. Ken?
They met so long ago, I hardly remember it. They met yesterday, and they approved 2017-2022 TIP Amendment number 16 that, if you remember, did not come before you last month, but they approved it for release to the public, and I'll come back to that. They also approved the draft 2019-22 TIP release for public comment to come back to the board in April for final action. So the 30-day comment period, I think, is going to start tomorrow, go to March 16th. And then any comments we've received will all come back to the TAC and the CAC for final recommendation to the board in April for hopefully approval. At the end of the meeting, Herman Stockinger made a presentation to the board. There was no handouts or no PowerPoints. It was just him talking. But it was on the statewide ballot issue and the list of projects that's being developed by CDOT for that issue. If you remember, this is the Denver Chamber of Commerce is developing a citizen-initiated ballot issue. I think they're supposed to turn it in next week, for official recognition and all of that. So CDOT's he gave a little bit of a description of CDOT's process over the years, where they've had project lists that they developed and what's their priority for this funding source, and then a year later, there was a different funding source, and it was a new project list. And so they finally developed their 10-year implementation plan, so that, you know, the one list could apply for multiple sources, and still trying to, you remember those, they had the Tier 1 and the Tier 2 projects on that, and, you know, statewide priorities. And probably at least half of his time at the stand podium centered around tolling and CDOT's policy about tolling new roads, existing roads, where that seems to be going in the future. And existing roads by law cannot be tolled, federal roads anyway. And so nobody said anything about any proposal for that to change. But new lanes, new capacity that is added has been tolled here in the state, and it is a viable option for sometimes for construction, sometimes for maintenance, but always their current emphasis now is gaining travel reliability, so that you've got a lane that's going to have will not be so congested or tied up that you're late getting your kids out of daycare or getting to DIA or getting to a doctor's appointment or something like that. So that's one of their major goals from tolling is travel reliability as well as maintenance and construction funds. And his discussion was not necessarily just about the I-25 gap project. It was more general. So that was kind of it for the board meeting, and since the first action item today is the TIP Amendment 16, I will wait until that to talk more about it.
Okay. That was a good segue. So let's deal with item 6A, our first action item. Fiscal year 2017 to 2022 TIP Amendment 16. Ken.
After TAC met last month, CDOT submitted a request for a TIP amendment to our existing TIP to add the El Paso County portion of the I-25 gap project. That's an 18-mile project, 2 miles approximately of which is in El Paso County. The other 16 miles are in Douglas County from the county line up to almost to Castle Rock. It's a widening project. It is certainly sped up much faster than anything that's ever been done in Colorado before. It's kind of gone from a 10-year normal process to a 5-year process, with FHWA allowing concurrent environmental work to be done instead of sequential. Right now, the official start date is for construction is November of this year. There is talk, and I have heard different dates reported, of construction starting in August or July. They are anticipating the EPA, or the environmental assessment work, to be done in May. FHWA is concerned that if the project is not in our TIP as well as in the Dr. Cog TIP, then there'll be a delay in starting the project if it's really ready to go in July or August, when everybody's sitting around waiting for time periods and public involvement periods and federal action to occur, that maybe there would be a delay. And there's certainly a federal emphasis right now on streamlining things and not creating bureaucratic delays. So even though we are out for a brand-new TIP, it would not become, we're expecting it to be approved by the board in April, but it would not become effective until 1 July. So,
Which is fiscal year 2019.
so for that reason, FHWA is urging that we amend the current tip. This is the information that was provided to the board, and there was a discussion at CAC. It was also not on the CAC agenda, so they did not take any official action. But they had a good discussion about it. So the board released it for public comment yesterday. They will take action on it at their next board meeting in March. So today, we're asking for a recommendation from the TAC, hopefully for approval. And if it is approved and the board acts on it and approves, then it'll go on up for conformity analysis and incorporation into the STIP. EPA's final, and FHWA's final action, and hopefully everything will be finished and ready to go by the time, or shortly after May, if that's when the environmental assessment actually gets done. The wording in the, as identified in the memo, there was a teleconference with FHWA, CDOT's Regions 1 and 2, Dr. Cog and us, and I invited Jennifer Irving to participate in that call. It's a balance between having an adequate description in the tip and an adequate cost estimate. At the same time, not presupposing the outcome of the environmental work and project scoping that hasn't been finished yet. So it's a fine balance, but the wording that is in the proposal is what everybody in that teleconference agreed to, and according to the feds, what we have proposed is not inconsistent with the plan. You remember that our board adopted the I-25 GAP project into our plan last October. We've never incorporated it into the tip because we were going to wait until the work was done and the project was identified. So, it is a little bit of a balancing act. The $50 million is roughly, kind of a percentage. 2 miles of the 18-mile, $350 million project is pretty close to $50 million. So, obviously, once the final project is scoped and the cost is figured out, the tip will have to be amended to reflect the final decision.
Okay. All right. So we can all see that the language in the tip amendment for the project description is specifically vague or generally not specific.
Yeah.
Which is by design, right? So, all right.
So at this point, unless somebody can think of something else, it seems like it could cover all possibilities that I've heard mentioned so far. Nothing is precluded.
All right.
And we
Any
haven't added any federal money at this point.
Right. All right. Any other questions on this item?
Can you give us a little more feedback about what the CACs? You said the CAC didn't vote on it because it wasn't on their agenda, but they had discussion. Could you give more insight on some of the things that they thought about for this project, or any feedback that they provided?
They were like everybody else. They're concerned about tolling.
Mm-hmm.
And why it's going to be a toll road, and the decision's already been made, and so some education that the decision has not been made for the similar projects in the state in the past. The majority of them have gone tolling, so the probability is it will go tolling. But that decision has not been made. It could still be an HOT lane, an HOV lane. I don't remember if there was any discussion at the meeting about the fourth lane, adding 2 lanes northbound and southbound. I think it was mostly centered around why it's needed and why it would be told or not told, or should be told or not told.
I think there was a CAC member that also mentioned that, why not just add 2 lanes if we know it's going to fill up in a couple of years? Kind of the same comments that we got at the board meeting yesterday. If we're going through this process now, why not really build it big to accommodate that?
Is that what the board said yesterday? I was going to ask about that.
There were some, comments about that.
And
yeah.
what else did the board have to say?
Some pointed questions to Herman. Why?
Those really came up
why
during
is
Herman's discussion rather
ahead,
than
Ken.
during the tip discussion. It went through without really much of a discussion. Part of the answer that I thought kind of got glossed over is that the $350 million cost estimate is all within the existing right-of-way. If you add the 4th lane, then you have to go outside the right-of-way, and you're not going to start construction in November of this year. And then you've got to identify another, I think Herman and John Hall, who is the CDOT I-25 gap project chief, he was here and addressed some of the questions. That, it's another $100 million if you're going to add the 4th lane and buy right-of-way and expand all the bridges and culverts and everything else. Now, he did say that anything that they do have to expand, such as a bridge or an interchange or whatever, that it will be enlarged to accommodate the 4th lane. We just won't put the 4th lane in. It's not needed in the next 20 years, the time period that they're looking out. It will certainly be needed in the future. And then I attended a different meeting, completely unrelated, in the afternoon, where somebody was talking about autonomous vehicles and the studies they've done with them. Capacity has increased 50% if you've got enough autonomous vehicles in the traffic that's using the road. So you increase capacity with technology without having to add asphalt. Maybe that will come into play in the future. Of course, that's all in the unknown because nobody knows how long it's going to take for that technology to become a predominant usage or vehicle type. So there was some of those kind of discussions, but for the TIP amendment itself, when it went through, it wasn't Stan Vanderwerf, El Paso County Commissioner, who has an operations background. He appreciated CDOT's comment that they're looking to, and now I don't remember the exact wording that 2 of them were using, and Rocky Scott, the Transportation Commissioner, about satisfying the needs of the toll lane and keeping it uniform so that it's a reliable lane. And he says, I understand that, and that's great for the toll lane, but what about everybody that's using the other 2 lanes? When and how are you going to optimize their travel experience? And it was that kind of a discussion that apparently from the give and take and both Stan and Rocky Scott have had that discussion several times already, it sounded like.
And he asked for a report that we haven't given to him yet, so I'm not sure what they're doing with the data public relations, but it's coming. On the reliability of the managed lanes and the other parts of the state.
Okay. Any other questions or any other discussion on this item?
It went out for release to the public yesterday. We've had a couple of questions from the media just clarifying that, but we've not had any comments back about the project one way, either way. But, you know, it's only been 24 hours. We'll certainly keep the TAC informed as any comments come in. Let you know how we're proposing to respond to them. And unless you desire a special meeting, I'll just have to take individual members' comments, because we can't do any electronic action.
So just a question, Ken. I mean, we do tip amendments every month, and they never go out with a press release asking for public input. Why do one for this case?
Because it's a $350 million project, $50 million in our region. Because it's a well-known project, and so because of the size and the controversy of the project, he thought it best to take it out.
And it's also being added to 2019, so that's part of your new tip that you're going to adopt, so it should have to go through that public process because of that. It's required.
That's a separate press release, too. I mean,
Right.
it's a separate
Right.
one, yeah.
And that's the next agenda item,
Right.
or next month's agenda item.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so that, it was because of the size and the controversy.
Okay. All right, would someone like to make a motion to approve this item?
Larry Manning, move approval.
All right, is there a second?
Anton Ramage, second.
All right, thank you. Any other discussion or any comments from the audience? Okay, all right. All those in favor, please say aye.
There was somebody there.
Please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, action item 6B, 2045 plan scoring criteria. Ken?
For this one, I think I'm going to move up to the podium. A few months ago, I gave you an overview of some proposed scoring criteria for the 2045 plan that staff developed after the final approval of the plans, goals, objectives, and targets. Got some comments from you and from CAC, and staff has gone back and tried to incorporate those comments and feelings, and we've come up with 9 scoring criteria, down from the 13 that we had last year, or for the last plan. And although the current draft plan has only 5 goals, it's got 18 objectives and targets. And so rather than a scoring criteria for every target, we think some of those targets are performance targets that we will report on an annual basis as the plan moves forward, and we monitor those. But some of them you have to have the data, but so you can't use them as a scoring criteria beforehand. And some of them are too involved to gather the data time frame that we would have for scoring projects with them. So we've wound up with 9, and they're identified in your packet. So what I'd like to do is to kind of go through how we would score these. So a maintenance project is pretty similar to the way we've done it in the past. We've used IRI for roads, we use bridge sufficiency rating for bridges. What's a little new is for transit, and unfortunately I failed to copy over transit. Transit has an MMT has a transit asset management plan, and there's 2 or 3 pages in there where they have a description of different, their buses, their physical facilities, their buildings, their bus stops, and it's on a 1 to 5 or a 0 to 5 scale. And so we've incorporated that for the maintenance scoring on our transit facilities. But what we propose to do is to send out to and make available to everybody. Here would be bridges that are identified. Beth, can you maybe cut those front 2 lights? Or thank you. This is a KMZ, so everybody should be able to use it. And this particular color coding here, the green and the blue bridges have a sufficiency rating above 50. By CDOT standards, they would not receive any funds. That's the standard that we've also used in the past and are proposing to continue using. There's a few in here that are identified in red. You can click on them, and I can't see it from here, but, oh, there it is. I think in that sufficiency rating. So there's this sufficiency rating. That's where the project applicant can obtain the value, and then you would look on the bridge sufficiency rating and see what score it would get. And obviously, the worse the bridge, the lower the sufficiency rating, the higher the score. For roads, this is the IRI conditions that was just taken this summer by the city of Colorado Springs, and then PPACG paid for the roads inside the MPO area outside of Colorado Springs. And similarly, you can click on a road, and there is the IRI condition. And the color coding here is not really so important, and we won't be using good, fair, poor terminology. There is no internationally or nationally approved terminology. Everybody kind of determines their own. So what we're using is the number. But in this case, there is a kind of a color coding that the lower the number, you move away from green to yellow to orange to red. So if you had a project on that road there, you could find the IRI index and provide that information. And again, as in the others, the worse the score, the higher the worse the rating, the condition rating, then the higher the score. Any questions on maintenance? For mobility, this is the same criteria we used last year. The change in the regional number of hours during the PM peak, the vehicle hours of travel. It's not on the individual facility, because whatever you do on one facility has a ripple effect across the region. So it may improve something on your road, but it also then, because of shift in traffic, it may have an impact and an improvement on surrounding roads, or it may worsen on surrounding roads. So we take a regional approach rather than just what did you do to 2 blocks of one road. For transit, we've talked about using the ridership as a measurement of mobility, and so if you increase the ridership, you've got more people traveling on the bus. The 3.3% is the average of the total ridership provided by Brian from MMT, on a daily basis, each route had about 3.3% of the ridership on average. So we're going to use that. If somebody proposed a new route in Fountain or Manitou or Colorado Springs in the future, then that would be a 3.3% increase in ridership. We don't have any data for anything else, so if somebody's proposing other types of projects, they're going to have to kind of come up with their own estimate of increased ridership and convince all of us in the scoring and the reviewing of that this makes sense, that it's reasonable. Non-motorized, we've got the same 3, 6, 10% increase as we do under transit. And the numbers there is just for consistency with transit, but we really don't have any data for non-motorized that we can use. I do have, this is the Strava data. I don't know if you've heard of Strava, but it's a company that you can register with, and it will track your cell phone and it'll clock you and you're walking and biking. This is all biking, and I think this is all biking. I don't remember if I don't think it has any pedestrian use in it. But it's a company that you can log into, and if you want to compete with yourself, it's got all the records that it keeps for you. And if you want to compete with others using the same route, you can do it. And it does have a number of people that, have used that route right there. I've noticed we just very recently got this and haven't had a chance to play with it. Unfortunately, like I say, it's only for those people, and it's mostly in their advertising. It's mostly the competitive people. You're competing against yourself or against others. So I have no idea what percentage of total users that is. It's certainly interesting data, but I don't know how we could use it for bicycle trips or usage in the future. So I think at this point, the non-motorized impact is going to be give your best shot in the application and best justification. Any questions about mobility? For connectivity and accessibility, there were several objectives under this goal. Transit had 2, but we're recommending that, and A and B were both reflective of those 2 objectives, but we're recommending that rather than a transit project getting 2 scores, it's either going to get one or the other score, and obviously the applicant, I'm sure, would want the best, so that's what we'll say. We'll give the best out of either one, or they can ask for which one. So the net change in headways, if at this point MMT is the only one that's got enough routes to do this. So if MMT was going to increase or reduce headway on 2 projects, go from 30 minutes down to 15, that'd be a total 30-minute reduction between those 2 routes. But if on their 3rd route they were going to go back from 15 to 30, they were going to increase by 15. Of the 3 projects, 3 routes, that would be a net decrease in 15 minutes, and so that's what the score would be based on the net of those 3 projects. So that's how we're looking at using that. The other one is that if you're going to put in a new bus route, you know where the stops are going to be, or if you're going to change and reroute an existing one and move it off to a different road, you know where the stops are going to be. And with the GIS and population density exercise, we can tell this new route is going to, with a quarter-mile buffer that is pretty standard for travel to bus stops, to walking to bus stops, then we can say this is an increase in the population served by these new bus stops or relocated bus stops. The more people served, then the higher the score. And if for some reason it reduced people served, then there would be a negative score. Non-motorized. In the non-motorized Appendix C of the non-motorized plan is the improvement corridors. This is the non-motorized plan that was approved a couple of years ago. But Chapter 3 and 4 give, I don't remember what the number of corridors is, 70, 80 corridors, and how long they are. And here it is in a table. And then in Chapter 4, I think they give more of a description of what's good and bad about the corridors. So for non-motorized, we're proposing that if you are doing something on one of these corridors or a combination of those corridors, the longer your project, the more corridors you're taking care of, then the higher your score. Quarter-mile project on one of these would not score as well as a half-mile project on one of these. And if your project is not on one of these corridors, then it would score even less. So any questions about connectivity and accessibility? Safety. Some of you were here a little over a year ago. GPACG purchased some software called Vision Suite Zero or Vision Zero Suite, and it's a crash analysis program software that has been developed, and CDOT's been using it for several years. So it became available commercially, and we purchased it and have used it to analyze. These are all signalized intersections in our region that we've got data for, and I think it's almost all of them. Again, in this case, the green, there is less accidents than the orange, which has less than the red. You'd be able to click on a intersection, and I think it's down here at the bottom. Should be LOSS, there it is, right at the bottom, 4. So that's the worst category. There are 4 categories, and they're identified in your packet. Level of safety service 1 and 2, we're proposing, would not receive any points, but a level of service 3 would receive points, and level of service 4 would receive higher points. So part of it is location. If you're addressing or doing something at an intersection with no accidents, why should you get safety points? If you're doing something that is significant where the number of people injured or killed, you should get more. The other half of the project is what are you doing? If you're just repaving the road at that intersection, that has a minimal impact on safety. It has some, but it's minimal. If you're putting in a roundabout, that has a significant impact on safety. If you're putting in streetlights instead of roads, if you're putting in turn lanes, if you're putting in medians, FHWA has a reference guide that we will make available. One is for pedestrians and one is for vehicle accidents. And it's crash reduction factors, and in it is all kinds of actions that could be taken. And then it has over here, I think it's this column, I can't read it, the percentage of crash reduction. And that's what we intend to apply. So if you had a level of service 3 intersection and you were to do something that was going to reduce accidents by 33 to 67%, you'd get a score of 7.5. Now, if you were doing that same crash reduction factor project at an intersection with no significant safety issues, level of service 1 or 2, you'd get 0 points. The other document we'll make available is similar, and it's pedestrians. So if it's a pedestrian project you're doing or the benefit to pedestrians, then that'll all to be considered. It's not, we're not just worried about vehicles. Any questions about safety?
I have a question, Ken. So the Q3 and the Q4, are those levels of service 3 and levels of service 4?
Yes. That's the shorthand for that.
The level of service 3, wasn't that your example? So you said it was a 7.5, but isn't a 7.5 a level of service 4?
I'm sorry, yes. Okay, level of service 3 would have been level of service 3 and 67, that'd be 4.5 points.
You want to make it so the likelihood of getting a 33 and a 67 is probably pretty low, but do we want to make it one way or the other? You have them both. 3 has a 67 and 4.5 has a 67, so it could go either way.
Well, one is, the first 3 items there is for 1.5, 3, and 4.5 points. Those are all in a level of service 3 accident location.
Right, but if I have a level of service 3 is 67%, it could either be a 3 or a 4.5. 3 has 33 to 67 and 4.5 has 67 to 100, so they're the same number.
She's saying, add a decimal.
Yes, go to 60s.
We'll do that, we'll do that.
Something that
Okay.
breaks that. Like I said, the likelihood's probably not very high, but right now they're exactly the same.
And conversely, there are some actions that are done that increase injury and fatalities. And we've we've used those in the past. You know, if you change a road from a collector to an arterial standard, you increase the speed, you increase the risk of injury and death. And so you could have some projects here that might be a negative impact for safety, although they are wonderful for mobility or something else. Anything else on safety? Economic vitality. This had a number of objectives underneath it. We combined, as we presented last time, one for the environment where we would use critical habitat, air quality, and stormwater in a combination. So you might have a project that, say it's a mobility project, and you're increasing speeds. If you increase speeds, you increase emissions. So it would be bad for air, but it might be wonderful for, or neutral on impact to critical habitats, and maybe it would be a positive for stormwater. And so you would combine the individual score for each one of those criteria, those parameters, and then come up with the score for the environment. This is, we're still working on this, but we'll have a habitat layer, just like we've had the layer for the other materials. Pretty sure all of this white is going to go away. That's this hooping crane, and it's occurrence. It's not critical habitat. You got Preble's jumping mouse up here, burrowing owls, and this is the, you can click on it. I think it says yellow-bellied cuckoo down here in all of these drainages, and I think that may also go away. So we will finish identifying those critical species habitat areas, but you would get a coverage like this, and if the project is, in the past, we just said if a project was in a critical habitat area, it was bad. And if a project was outside of a project area, it was good. We're going to try to be a little bit better this time and say, for a larger size project, your areas of influence can extend beyond the boundaries of your project. And so you might be paralleling the blue stem prairie grass down here, and I think it's the Johnson Reservoir, right down here below the airport. You might want to put something in there, but, you know, maybe what you're doing on Powers is significant enough that it impacts this area right here, even though it's not actually in it, or you're not filling the pond in and building over. So we've got the definition of our influence areas there. So there might be projects that last year would, if we rescored them using areas of influence rather than strictly location and no consideration to what they did, would score differently this year. But again, I think all this white will disappear. Any questions on environment?
Yeah, Ken, I do. So as I recall, when we were doing the targets under that, and they are, as from my recollection, they're accurately reflected up in the before we started looking at the different scoring numbers about how the approved target was to mitigate impacts to critical habitats as determined through the NEPA process. We had an extended conversation about meeting NEPA requirements, not about where the project was. So I'm trying to reconcile what we had discussed and what's shown here about how we'd address critical habitats through the NEPA process versus what we're showing here of -3, 0, and 3 for is it in a critical habitat or not. That was not part of the conversation at all.
Okay.
I think we worked past that and said, you might have a project that's in a critical habitat, but if you follow what was the guidance and recommendations that was developed through the NEPA process, then you were still, you weren't necessarily going to be suffering any type of detrimental points coming to you, I guess. Saying it poorly, I apologize. This doesn't talk about the NEPA process at all, as we have identified in the targets. This just says where you're doing your project.
Right.
I find that to be, that's not in line with what we agreed to previously. So I'm not, can you walk me through that, how we,
Okay.
can you help me reconcile that, please?
I'm not changing the target. That is the approved target.
Mm-hmm.
So now I'm trying to develop a scoring criteria. The projects that you're going to submit, you're not going to do a NEPA process for 20 years.
Tracking, absolutely, I agree with that.
So trying to use a NEPA process as a scoring criteria, nobody's going to have a NEPA process, and either you make the assumption that everybody is going to get NEPA approved or nobody's going to get NEPA approved. There's no way to use that for scoring and evaluating.
Okay.
So
then that will lead to a question I'll wait till the very end on. And I agree with what you're saying there.
Yeah.
20-year out projects, you'll do the NEPA process then, which is what we had as our goal. So now that'll come a conversation when we start talking about weighting.
okay.
But I'll wait till the end on that.
And the other thing is you notice in the scoring, and we did put in including mitigated impact. Now, again, from an environmental standpoint, you can go out and you can wipe out 5 acres of a wetland in a large wetland and then build or mitigate that by building 5 acres standing by itself someplace else. But is that the same as one large range for a certain species? From a purely environmental standpoint, we're taking the stand that it's not. So that's why we would have put in here that we would not worry about the mitigated impact, because the emphasis from this point of view is build your project someplace else and stay out of the habitat.
So that's inconsistent with what we talked about when we developed the targets. And we talked about following NEPA. And I understand you don't do NEPA for 20 years out, but as we're levying points against projects, that's inconsistent.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to continue to struggle with
Yes, it has been a struggle to come up with what do we do, because there is no evaluation criteria for the target.
Yeah. Right.
So we always run into this problem when you have the meetings and you look for the goals and the objectives and the targets, and yes, certainly agree with the targets, but then when you get down to it, how do I measure the impact of an individual target, of an individual project? We've always run into some problems.
I think that's probably going to warrant a lot more conversation then.
Okay. We can come back to that. Vehicle delay. This is one that we've used in the past. This is, we've used congestion, we've defined congestion as the volume to capacity ratio and the PM peak to indicate there's been a change in that ratio due to a project. We've said it had to change by greater than 0.1. Otherwise, that gets so small, that can be generated by noise or is just noise. So that's what we've used in the past. And again, some projects might actually increase congestion because they weren't mobility projects, they were something else, but they wind up increasing congestion, so they would score negatively. And those that reduce congestion would score higher. In the past, we have used just a straight normalization. Whatever project did the best, then it got 9 points, and if another project did half as good as that, then it got half of the maximum score, and it got 4.5. We also used a different way where we grouped them, and so that's what we're proposing to use this time. We would come up with the range of reduction from all the projects that submitted, and those in the best third would get the 3 points, those in the middle third would get 2 points, and those in the bottom third would only get 1 point. And if your project did not reduce congestion at all, then it would get 0 points. Now, because this is an economic indicator rather than just any congestion anywhere, we are focusing on the regional, the significant, and the NHS corridors that are in the 2040 plan and have been approved. And I unfortunately don't have a map here to show you what those are, but we can get that prepared and have it. So those are already approved. And so I guess I got my, so I think on our corridor, the NHS was less significant than the regional corridor, which was less significant than the strategic corridor. So that's how we've tried to combine the significance of the road as well as the amount of congestion that is changed on those roads. Is that understandable? Okay. For infill, this was obviously a item of quite a bit of,
Constructive conversation?
yes. So what we are proposing would be something like this. The pink here is the 2010 census urban boundary. That's designated by the census. The blue underneath it is the 2015 population plus employment density of 1,000. So it's adding employment, and it's adding the military that's connected way out here. Actually, this, by definition, fits with all of their employment numbers out here, even though there's low population. So our proposal is that a project out here in this wide, bright yellow is outside the urban boundaries, the outermost boundary, and it would get nothing. This mustard colored is the 2040 future population. We would propose that this will be different for the 2045 when the small area forecast is developed. And we would also going to include population and employment in the future, just like we have for 2015. So it would not be just population, which is what's shown here. So, and then you'd have the 2010. So you're going to have three. You have the 2010. The blue is the 2015 population and employment. And then you would have the 2045 future growth areas, and then you would have everything else. So inside the census urban boundary would be 9 points. Inside the 2015 population and employment, the blue would be 6 points. Inside the 2045 population plus employment would be 3 points, and then everything else outside would be 0. Understandable? Okay. Then the last one, which we have always used, and is certainly a federal emphasis, is that plans and programs be cost effective. So this would be the benefit cost ratio calculated by using the total weighted score of our projects divided by the cost in millions of dollars. And it's semi-normalized. So again, we've broken it into 10 groups, and depending on where your project cost-benefit ratio falls compared to the best one that's submitted, you would get 0 to 9 points. And we have always used a cost-benefit criteria in the past. So that's what we're proposing for scoring criteria. If you wanted to go back and talk more on some of the others, or what's your pleasure?
Any other comments? Questions?
Brian, are we also going to talk about, or is there an intent to have a conversation regarding weighting of each of these? As we've gone through previous and talked about targets, we recognize that some would carry a higher weight than the others.
Yeah, we talked about that.
In fact, that was emphasized several times as we were going through.
Yeah, well, we talked about that last time we talked about this, and Victoria made the comment, what did the board approve? What was in the development of the 2045 plan? And we went back and looked, and it did identify the CAC as doing the weighting. So we're not proposing to have TAC or staff participate in the weighting.
For the 2040 plan, the CAC?
No, for the 2045, for the development framework and schedule.
So we're not changing anything from 2040 to 2045? The CAC is still going to do
The CAC will still do it.
weighting?
I don't remember what 2040 did. Is we've done it multiple ways in the past. I know it started off that it was CAC only, and then I know there was one time
Well, for a time it
when
was.
TAC, CAC, and staff
CAC
all
and staff,
did it. And
yeah.
I know one time we even had waiting by the public, whoever showed up at a public meeting. So it has fluctuated, and
But,
keep trying something different and then going back to the CAC.
okay.
That's what we're proposing.
But that's what
That's what the board
the
approved.
board approved, the
in
planning framework that said that we do the.
the criteria.
Everybody gets involved with the goals, the objectives, targets, and the scoring criteria. But then the CAC does the weighting.
Sets the,
That's right, okay.
reflecting the priorities. Mhm.
Thank you.
Jennifer?
I just wanted to point out that as staff was going through developing the numbers, the scoring that we've proposed, we did try to start with as neutral of a platform as possible, and that's why in some examples, where you had the A and B for transit, we didn't want to kind of double count transit accidentally, if that wasn't the intent. And the same with environment, how it was divided into 3 separate, because we felt like, having 9 points for stormwater, 9 points for habitat, et cetera, might be a little bit sort of too much. Now, of course, when the CAC talks about weighting, they can take that back and say, no, we want stormwater to be half the score. But we tried to start with as neutral of a platform as possible.
Okay. I just have a couple comments, and I was kind of waiting till the end to give these, but going back to Goal 2 for mobility, and actually this could go for Goal 3. Mountain Metro, I mean, we don't really use the PPACG process for any operating funds. I mean, in the past, when there was CMAQ money available, we were able to implement and operate a new service, a new bus route with CMAQ funds. And, CMAQ is most likely going away. And there's really no other source of funds because you can't use operating money or you can't use STP Metro dollars for operating, and TAP is not a eligible funding stream for operations. So for the transit scoring criteria under mobility, I mean, the only thing that I can think of is, and that's what I'll have to prove, is if we apply for bus stop accessibility improvement project like we have in the past, I would have to make the case that by improving the conditions around this bus stop, it would result in a ridership gain.
Well, if you can use Metro funds to purchase buses, though, correct?
Yeah, but we use other FTA funds or RTA funds for large capital purchases like that.
But what if somebody else wanted to, either Manitou or Fountain?
No.
I mean, they'd be eligible to use them, correct? So if they,
That's true. Yeah.
if they just used the Metro dollars for the capital purchase, and then they'd have to come up with enough match to pay for the
Operations,
operation.
yeah.
It wouldn't just be an 80-20 split because
Yeah.
to get this, they'd have to have the proposed route and say, we want to buy 3 buses for this proposed route, and here's the stops, and it's going to increase ridership
Yeah.
by this much, and all we want is the capital purchase, so.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, I'm not suggesting to change the transit criterion under mobility, but it's just, I mean, I know Fountain kind of doesn't want federal dollars, right? I mean, it's mostly a locally funded system. But you're right, I mean, Manitou, even though, I mean, the arrangement we have with Manitou is there are vehicles, we do the purchase, and we operate that service for them. But, yeah, so, I mean, we can leave this.
So
as
if
is, but-
if it's viable, even though the odds of it being used might be quite low.
Yep. Yep, okay. And I know the either or for goal 3, you know, the criteria A or B, it would be either or, we wouldn't get scored on both.
Correct. I think we make that statement in here, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's kind of the same argument for Headway, since we wouldn't be using up any of that PPACG funds for operations. We wouldn't be making any improvements to Headways. But by default, you would
So-
score it on item B.
So if we leave it in there, it looks good that we've
Sure.
got this parameter to address one of the objectives and targets that was approved, even though you're saying it's even less of a chance
Yeah.
that it would ever be
Right.
used. Looks good, but doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. Now, for criterion B, the population served within a quarter mile, the way that I could see this, playing out is, you know, again, if we improve the accessibility around a bus stop, that could result in
Thank you.
more ridership. This would probably be a more appropriate use, but yeah, like you said, by default, whatever project we submit, it's either going to be A or B, but it's most likely going to be B. So that's fine. It looks good.
Okay.
Are there any other questions or comments about any of these?
I have a question on stormwater. It's just kind of like a NEPA issue. We're going to be doing the stormwater best management practices still 20 years in the future, so how would you say whether it's negative, positive, or negative? As soon as we're disturbing the ground, you're going to impact the stormwater.
Anytime you increase the impervious surface, you're going to increase water running off. And this gets back into the discussion that we've had for years. Well, if it's mitigated, if it's collected and channeled, and it's not causing erosion when it's run off and dumped into the creek, that's different than letting it flow over the surface and through the grass and be filtered and soak into the ground versus digging up retention ponds and collecting some of it. And all of those, I wish stormwater had disappeared. But it kept its life and is still here. So what we've wound up using was strictly just, if you increase impervious surface, you're going to increase runoff. That for stormwater,
Except Brian, who's going to, make an ADA accessible bus stop, and then he doesn't increase impervious. And I'm just picking on you as a good example. I'm not really picking on you.
Well, if we improve it,
We-
that
we-
includes putting in a concrete pad, so there is a,
But that's already
Amen.
likely on a sidewalk area.
Well, a lot of times it's, there's a buffer between the
In the
curb
grass.
and the
It's in
sidewalk.
it's in the grass area.
Filling in that concrete
We
pads.
talked about his 10 square feet of concrete that he put in.
You get -3 for that.
Yeah.
And obviously, the better somebody can write up and explain what they're doing and how they're going to accommodate it. Because this stormwater is something that we wind up reviewing the score of more than any other criteria, because people are dissatisfied with it, and so it does become a little bit more subjective. All I can say is fight harder next time to get it out of the scoring criteria, but it got approved, so it's here.
We have to work with it, yeah.
So again, maybe this was where I'm kind of lost on. Good Lord, I apologize. We're determining the recommendation for the point values today. But what was approved for these, I'm going to go back and look at it again, I'm sorry. Look at it. We will comply with stormwater best management practices. Critical habitats, minimize impact as determined through NEPA. Meet or exceed state, national ambient air quality standards. That's what has been approved, correct? Those things under
Targets.
the approved targets under Goal 5.
Correct.
Objective 1. When we were originally looking at some of these, I'll go back to the critical habitat. That was the original, as I recall, the proposal by staff was, does it, making the target, is it in an area or out of an area? Is it in an area that has a critical habitat in it? Yes or no? Instead, we got to move down to where we're talking about complying with national level standards, so this doesn't have to be changed, such as make sure we're following the NEPA process, or complying with whatever our stormwater best management practices are. I'm still, and I don't have a better answer, and that's what really frustrates me more than anything else, to be honest with you. I don't have a better way of saying how do we assign point values to those areas. Because everyone's going to say, take care of the environment, I got it, all about that. We don't want to make the area any worse, got that. We have to improve drainage, you bet. But we're not going to have any level of detail on any of those things to be able to assign a point value if we're looking at a project 20 years out. And I just don't know that that's, I'm ready to go to press, if you will, on that, on assigning -3, 0, or 3, particularly if we don't understand what the weighting may or may not be with it at this point, because I think it's appropriate that the CAC does that, because they kind of speak for the people, if you will. I'm struggling with that.
Yeah, and that's not an unusual situation. A lot of times we've done this step well ahead of the weighting, and it's always an unknown. I mean, yeah, we would, in a perfect world, we could adjust the scoring based on what we know the weights are going to be, but that's
Well, can we
not
do
really
that? Can we get the weighting from the CAC? Maybe run some projects through from the previous ones that we've done, previous lists of projects that have been submitted, and let's see how they work out. Because right now, if we could approve numbers right now, that's all we're looking at is numbers. I think they've done a great job of putting this together. But without the weighting that goes along with it, I don't want to have discovery learning after the CAC meets in front of the board and come to find out, oh my God, we put together a pig. I kind of like to see the whole thing put together with the weighting, with the scoring, and decide if we need to do any tweaking before we put it in front of the board.
Well, the way we were going to do it this time, same as we've done it last time, is that the recommendation you make today will go to the board for approval. Once the board approves the criteria and the scoring, then the CAC will meet afterwards and develop the weighting. So they don't develop weighting on draft criteria.
don't know that I like that.
That's like the chicken and the egg.
That's, right, why can't we
We
get,
have to do ours before they do theirs.
we have to do ours, the board has to approve it, then they do theirs.
Right.
And then we find out what we have at the end of the whole thing. That sounds like.
Well, I will
putting
just,
this thing together, I don't, there's got to be a better way to have a process that provides a more completely thought-out resolution. Up where we're at right now, going through all the way to the targets, I got it, but now that we're talking about this part and the algorithm that will put all this together, I'd like to see what how our last year or our previous projects we've submitted, how they've gone through, and let's see, would they still have gotten funded using the same process?
we did that for a few projects. Obviously, we don't have the weighting, but we did that for a few, and some of the scores changed. We also we used that exercise trying to come up with what is a good way of scoring, and the object of the criteria and the scoring is to evaluate and separate projects. We cannot fund everything you want. So which one gets funded? So what is a good tool? What's a good parameter to separate projects? We have drawn those off of what the board has said. These are the goals, the objectives, what we want to do in the next 20 years for transportation. Now, strictly addressing game strategy, how you separate and evaluate a project, what's the technical way, do we have data, is the scoring broad enough that they can actually separate the project, or as somebody's already commented, for one of these, everybody's going to get the same score. We try to stay away from those, but based on what gets approved by the board, we have sometimes been trapped into it. Water is one of those. Almost everybody gets the same score, so although it's a criteria, it's not a good one. So that's the technical process of evaluating and separating the projects. The second process, which to me is independent, is what's the priorities of this region as determined and expressed by the CAC and approved by the board. And then apply that priority ranking or whatever you want to call it to these criteria to help, again, aid in separating out and ranking projects.
Yeah, I'll say this, I know it's not going to satisfy everybody, but being through a number of these cycles every 3 or 4 years, these are not new questions, and the same questions are asked every time. Why can't we know ahead of time what the weighting is going to be, and then we can settle on how the projects are going to be scored? And I don't like to say, well, it's been this way the last 3 times, so we should keep doing it the same way. But I think that's the process that we all knew ahead of time what it was going to be. We knew what our steps were in developing all of these goals, objectives, targets, and the evaluation criteria, and we knew that the CAC was going to do the weighting. And I think we were aware of what the schedule was and what the timing was and how that was going to play out. And I mean, I don't think there's a way around it, and we've dealt with it in the past, and I think we can deal with it this time. Is just, everything's going to be scored equally, and it is up to the CAC on how they're going to do the weighting. Each cycle, their priorities change. I have no idea how this is going to play out, if this is going to be a higher weighted goal than the other 4. But I don't know, we're all in the same boat, and I'm not sure if we can really take a step back and do this jointly with the CAC weighting and still meet the schedule.
We're only 3 months behind schedule right now.
Good. Then we're not plowing new ground.
What's that?
I would recommend that we would do that. I mean, if we do this every year, we keep doing something that we're frustrated with every year. I'm not trying to like gaming the projects. I'm just trying to make sure we understand. We, the TAC and the CAC, understand what the algorithm is. Are these the things we want to do? Maybe if we find out as we score certain projects and we look at previous ones with the new algorithm and with the new point spread that we're using, they may decide they want to change their weighting to accommodate things that they believe that are important.
Well, this,
I would be in favor of having a separate meeting between now and the next board meeting with the CAC, or let them have their meeting, and then we get together after that. We spent a lot of effort, and I think appropriately so, developing the goals, the objectives, and the targets. And now I don't know that I feel very comfortable with everything that we have on there and what the board has approved, even if it wasn't what I personally felt from where I sit. This, I don't have that same level of comfort, and I don't know that I could defend it to the CAC with the numbers that we have there. And I certainly couldn't defend it to the board and explain, yes, this is how it all goes together.
so leaving out the weighting part of it, and knowing the weighting or not knowing the weighting. I mean, what are your recommendations to change these scoring values for habitat, air quality, and stormwater?
I don't know. I think it's where we need to have some smart people come together and think about it a little bit. When I got the read aheads and saw this, looked at it more today and received Ken's briefing, and this self-frustration, I will admit, I just don't like the answer, but I don't have a better one because it doesn't follow what the targets are.
Jennifer?
I'd recommend we get some smart people together and we think through this a little bit more.
So the scoring criteria and weighting issue was sort of just described as a chicken and egg issue, which in my mind, that phrase is usually used to describe something that could kind of go either way, and we just chose one, which is not reflective of the process here. It's actually very intentional, and as I mentioned, we tried to come up with something that's as objective as possible. So there's a certain pool of points under each goal. So we didn't, like the example I used, we didn't want there to be 18 possible points starting out for the environment goal. So the idea is to have the TAC do the technical piece, establish a pretty neutral objective baseline, and then by design, the CAC gets to apply the more subjective, this is what we think is more important kind of piece. And so although I understand why you all would want to know ahead of time what the weighting is going to be. To be fair, that is kind of gaming the system. If you say, well, we're going to counteract their high weight with a low score or counteract their low weight with a high score. So really there's a reason that the process has always followed what we're suggesting here.
And I understand your point completely. I still disagree.
Let me take you off on a little different tangent. I agree that I think you've done a very good job in putting these together, and this is hard every time we go through it. I also agree we probably need a little bit more time to look through some of this. We didn't have the benefit of any of the maps when we were looking at these. And then there's just some other issues of, for example, goal number 2. If you have a road-based project, your score can go from -9 to +9. But if you have a transit project, you can't go into the negatives. You can only get positive or nothing. And non-motorized the same. So your scale is different for different modes, and that's not fair per mode within the same goal. So these should all, if the first one's going to go -9 to 9, then the transit and the non-motorized should all have the same scale to them. Brian, I heard your point on goal number 3 on the transit and the headway. I would suggest we just get rid of the headway one because no other mode has an option to get a choice of a score. And we can just get rid of that by taking it away, especially since it has no impact on you. On the non-motorized section, We're only looking at the regional non-motorized transportation system from the plan, and I would argue once again that any improvement to the non-modal system is an improvement for the region. So I think that one needs to be broader. And again, we're into the same issue of going from a -9 to a +9 versus a 0 to a +9. And again, the difference of the scoring scale based on mode. Also on that one, on that connectivity and accessibility, there's no scoring for roadway projects available at all. I think we need to look at the safety one a little bit too, because we're really only looking at intersections, and there's a lot more safety issues that can be addressed in a roadway than just at an intersection. And so I'm not going to go on and on, but I think we should probably take a step back, have a workshop like we did on the goals and the targets, and, go through some of these issues and look at them, because I don't think we have a fair scoring set based simply on scale, not even taking into account all the other comments from today.
I would recommend it would be a TAC workshop.
Yes. So I guess, do you want me to just move?
Sure.
I'd like to move that we postpone this item until we can have a special TAC workshop where we can go through some of these issues, change them on the board, have this information come to TAC members so that we can come with an informed basis and get together and figure out some changes and vote at that next workshop. That was a really long motion, sorry.
If you're going to vote, it can't be a workshop. It has to be a special meeting.
Okay, special meeting then.
You want to say all that again with a special meeting?
How about I just move that we have a special meeting to further discuss this issue and vote?
That would lead to a vote at a special.
Yeah.
Jennifer? Well, I'm sorry. You got a motion on the floor.
I was just going to ask for a second, and that we would try to do this special meeting prior to the March TAC, so we don't lose too much time. Would that be good? Have the special meeting before the March meeting, and then use the March meeting to recommend approval of it?
If possible, I think we'd like to do it. And following what Jennifer said earlier about following, I think it is a good process to have it before the CAC.
Yeah, but it sounds like it's still gonna go to the board anyway after we vote, so it's gotta go from here to the board.
So we just have to hold it before the next
I got a
board
comment to
meeting.
make before you
Yeah,
vote.
sure. Okay. All right, any more comments? Jennifer, did you have something or no? Or Bethany? I saw a hand. Okay, go ahead.
I do. Jennifer, what does this do for the time period for the call for projects?
We don't have any wiggle room in the schedule to do the, we've pushed the call for projects back in our schedule from March to April, assuming foolishly that this would go through today. So it would either push the call for projects back a month, meaning you would all have a month less to complete your application, which is probably not the direction it would go. It would mean we would have a month less to review the applications. So we don't have wiggle room, but if it takes an extra month, then we lose a month in
So
reviewing applications.
one less, I think we got close to 3 months currently, so it'll be a month less for the call for project time period.
Are you all right with having less time to develop project applications?
I heard two things. I heard we can either shrink that part or shrink the review part of the projects once they're submitted.
We cannot shrink, if you want a good job in the review, you cannot shrink the time.
We could cut it in half, though, and shrink half of the application and half of the review,
Yeah, I could split
so
it.
that everybody has to work a little harder.
We don't have the staff time to reduce the review time.
I was just going to point out that you're looking at PPACG transportation staff right now. I don't mean to have a pity party, but that's the reality of what we're working with. So just keep that in mind.
The other option is if we have to vote today, I have to vote no.
Correct.
This is a hugely important part of this process, is the scoring. And if we don't take the time and do it appropriately, and do it in a way that is fair across all modes and across all goals, we've lost already, and it doesn't matter what we put in the application. The other thing I also would like to know, too, is when we go through this, what does that application look like? Which ones of these are being spit out of the model versus which ones that we have to justify? You know, there's just a lot of questions that I still have that I'd really like to have a further discussion about.
All right, what if we called the special meeting that was still before the February CAC meeting, and it would be publicized ahead of time, develop the scoring criteria at the special meeting, and then vote on it then. So then our action will go to the CAC. The CAC will see that, and we'll still stay on schedule.
So you're saying next week?
Well, it's going to have to be, right?
You have to do
What?
it before the CAC or before the board? Because from here,
Well-
it goes to the board, right?
Pardon?
From the TAC, it goes to the board for their approval, correct?
Correct.
So really, we just need to meet for the board meeting, whatever that.
Well, it could, yeah,
timeline is.
it could be. It doesn't, we don't have to have our decision before, I mean, the CAC is most likely going to do what they're going to do
Sign
anyways.
the waiting, Jennifer
Yeah.
educated me on that. We're going to sign the waiting, I think I get that. You're not going to influence that out of the way.
Mhm.
So my question is, when does that meeting have to be in order for us to make a decision and have it on the board agenda?
Well, the board packet has to go out March 7th,
Or March 7th?
And the memos are due the week before,
yeah. So that's the 28th.
We got 2 weeks.
the day after the CAC meeting.
Okay, so we could do it next week, but we have.
So that would be, the week after next is the 26th, 27th, and 28th. It's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday.
But
And
if you
CAC
do
is-
it next
CAC
week
is
and then
Wednesday.
need another meeting, you have another week.
No,
If we have a special
we're
meeting-
saying we're going to have one meeting. We'll have one special meeting to develop this and then vote on it.
I like the way Jennifer's thinking, though. If you knuckleheads can't figure it out next week, you got a whole nother week to recover. That's really where she's being very kind in saying it that way. But,
Okay, so I made a motion. Do we have a second?
Randy Williams, I'll second it.
Okay. All in favor, say aye.
aye.
Opposed? Okay.
Thank you all.
We will look for a date and a time that the room is available.
Okay.
If we can't find something here, can we use your
Sure.
facility?
Oh, yeah, sure. Yep.
Okay.
Yep, just let me know.
I think Jennifer's spot on. If next week is available for, that'd be awesome.
Well, go ahead and finish your vote.
Okay. That's it. So that's done. We'll just look for a doodle poll or something and a location, and we'll get it done. All right. All right, item 7.
Can I just finish up here before you jump ahead, Brian? I forgot to show this one, Victoria. This is the roads. We've only been able to do the safety analysis on the state highways. And it doesn't show up very here with the lights, but it's in here, and it's the same thing. You can click on a road and the level of service, one of these down here.
But only for state roads, so CDOT roads?
They're on CDOT roads.
So if you were doing a project on one of our local roads, it
Then
would only be measured if it...
we can do the analysis on most of the local roads. We've not have time to do it and get it prepared to show you.
I see, so you do it during that scoring
But-
to...
They could do it during the scoring, if we get X number of projects rather than every road in the county. I think
Or
we.
city.
Or city. City's part of the county.
Okay, thank you for explaining that.
As far as the modeling, the model would be used for the air quality impact, as we've used it in the past. The more you increase VMT, the more, or speeds and VMT, you increase emissions. It would also be used for the volume to capacity ratio for the part of the congestion reduction on the economic vitality score. Now, there are a lot of projects that cannot be modeled, and so you have to make a qualitative assessment. Okay, we're going to do a study. We're going to do a plan. What's the impact of that on emissions? What's the impact of that on water, critical habitat? We're going to do a bike path, bike lane. We're going to do a sidewalk project. What does that do for air, water? So those can't be modeled.
So are you saying that we'll basically have a verbal narrative for everything?
Everything I've showed you here, you don't need it because this is how we're going to do it. We're going to go and look at that number, and it's already identified that that number gives you this score.
But you don't have sidewalk projects. But you don't have sidewalk projects in the safety analysis, though.
Right.
So,
But any others, so everything I've showed you today, where all you have to do is click on it and see the value, then you can score it yourself right there. That value is 49 on a maintenance sufficiency rating. It gets 1 point. It was 29. Oh, it's going to get 8 points. There's no justification. You don't need to write anything because we will do the scoring based on that value. Now, if you have two projects that you're considering, two bridges, you're going to want to pick the one that has the lower rating. That's where you could use this information to go look at it, unless you've got your own sufficiency rating that CDOT has given you, and you want to use your table instead of this. But if you don't have all this information, this is what we're going to use for scoring. So you could look at it and see which of your two projects would score best under this criteria, and then decide which one you want to submit. That's how we thought you would want to use it.
okay.
All right, and so before we move to the next item, so process-wise for the special meeting, staff heard a fair amount of comments on things we may like to see tweaked. Could we just make sure that they are somehow put in the packet as at least alternative scoring criteria to what's already being considered? That way we don't have to start from the beginning again.
So you're basically saying submit comments before the meeting?
Well, yeah, make sure that what was said today is gathered, but then, yeah, if you all have any comments or suggestions before that special meeting, get them into staff ahead of time so we can, and then get them out to everybody
Just CC everybody.
to consider.
Yes.
Yeah, so we can.
We're
Manage our
closed.
time.
We're closed Monday, so we're going to need comments. Since we don't know the date of the meeting yet, we have to mail out the packet a week before the meeting, so it's going to be mail out is next week.
Yep.
So get your comments in early next week.
Okay.
So I don't know that it's a requirement to mail it out a week in advance. I think it's just a courtesy. So if you
No,
want to have it.
it is a requirement. Huh?
Agenda, but not the
Sunshine's,
package.
yeah, the agenda's for
Otherwise,
sunshine.
we're looking at the following
Well,
week.
okay, so maybe the bylaws have been changed, but it has always been the packet that got mailed out a week before the meeting. Posting the agenda for sunshine laws is something different. That's only a 24-hour notice.
Oh,
All right, so we'll have to just get the date nailed down quickly and send the agenda out and have the meeting a week after that. And the supporting materials can come out anytime or up to a day before the meeting?
Well, then you've
That
got
what
no
you're saying?
time to review it beforehand. That's the problem with waiting until the last minute. Otherwise, we could just walk it on. But
Okay. So if you have any comments, just get them in early next week. All right. Okay, we can move on?
thank you.
All right, thanks, Ken. Item 7, small area forecast update.
Good afternoon, Jennifer Valentine, Transportation Planner with PPACG. So I just wanted to give you all another hopefully pretty quick update on the small area forecast. I think I presented a pretty similar update maybe about 2 months ago now, and so I just wanted to check back in and report where we are. Fortunately, we're pretty much on this schedule still. Right now, we're on step 3, so February 2018. So the main change that you'll see in this step 1 through 8 is last time I came and gave you this overview, I did hear some concern about, you all, of course, don't want these materials at the last minute and only have 1 month to review it, because the small area forecast is, a pretty important piece of the long-range plan. And so given that we're already a few months behind on the scoring criteria, and the small area forecast really needs to be done in time for when we're going to start scoring projects. That's really how it's used. It can be on a similar timeline, so we built in an extra month or 2 at the end to bring small area forecast results through the TAC and the CAC for 2 or 3 months, just to have some healthy discussion. So we did get through conducting our first round of simulation runs with a lot of learning of the model and tweaking of data. Last week was a pretty intensive week meeting with most of our member governments. So we met with Ramir at El Paso County. I met with Carl and Paige and Conrad at Colorado Springs. I met with Laura and Sally and Ben in Woodland Park, Wade and Karen in Manitou, Brandy, and a whole bunch of other people in Fountain. And then I've been emailing with Monument, Green Mountain Falls, and Palmer Lake, and so we might get some remote review going on there. So we had some really, really good discussions about the output and about the model. I think the main thing that came out of it was just we're going to have some additional development projects to enter in, which is a really good thing because that's what makes the model more accurate. So we start with a really clear picture of what's on the ground now and what's in the development pipeline, and then the model has a better idea of what to project out to 2045. A couple of other interesting little tweaks, to the zoning layer, to our mask layers, but probably nothing I need to get into right now. So we were definitely happy to, I think Ramir was maybe going to have some internal meetings with Victoria, for example. We were happy to have Brandy at the Fountain meeting. So, if any of you want to get involved with, I've been working directly with your land use planner co-parts? Colleagues, that works. But, it's certainly not a secret at this point. The results are not ready for public consumption by any means. But, if you want to get involved, certainly just reach out to your land use planner colleague. And, I'm sure they'll let you look at the materials we've sent them. So far, we've been really transparent with we provided entity-specific results to, for people who don't want to look at 800 or 900 TAS's worth of information, but we also provided a spreadsheet with every single TAS in the region. So if this is really your thing, feel free to dive in and see what we have so far. And I think that's about it. Any questions?
Any questions for Victoria?
Can you go ahead and share with the TAC members at the same time that you're going to share with regional experts? Can we just have the data at the same time?
Yeah, we can probably do that. I think the first piece was really pretty important we're going through TAS by TAS and looking at numbers and densities and ranges, and so we really weren't comfortable sharing much beyond kind of the land use planners. But I think by the time we get to the regional economic experts, we could probably send out a draft, not to be shared with the public, to you guys if you just want to start taking an early look. I think that would be fine.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, anything else? Oh, Darren.
Jennifer, we have a pretty significant workforce on Schriever, so if there's anything we can provide to you for our military installations that would help in our projections out to 2045, we're happy to work with you, so.
Great. Yeah, fortunately, we do have the joint land use study in-house, and I've been leaning heavily on one of their staff members. Tom Miller was actually at all of the meetings last week, and, he did pipe up occasionally and bring those military issues to light. But we did get, so I'll just mention one thing about the model. So we did get numbers from the military planners, through Brian Potts, and so those are the only areas where we applied what are called adjustments. So if we know that there are going to be, I'm going to get the number wrong, but say there are going to be 20,000 employees in the Schriever TAS in 2045, we put in 20,000. We don't let the model, predict or run with it. We set that number because it's a federal thing. It's not a real estate market sort of thing. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Jennifer.
Thanks.
Item 8, member entity announcements. Is there anything anybody would like to share?
I just want a question that kind of goes back to the previous items. So in that packet that you put together, will you send out as much of that background information as possible that we can actually go through and identify?
And I think, will we also send the KMCs?
Yeah, I'll say that. Just realize that most of those are still a work in progress, so the color coding and what you're going to see is that claims it's good, fair, poor is incorrect. It's not something we're using. We're just using the numbers, but.
Good to know.
Okay. All right, items for future TAC meetings. We'll just have this item, scoring criteria for the special meeting and.
Scoring criteria, public comment on the draft tip. I need to start introducing all of the other federal performance measures that are required. Air quality, freight movements, congestion, maintenance. The only one we've ever done so far is safety. But all of the others have to be adopted by sometime in May 20th or 28th, I think. So we need to start that discussion, get board approval with the resolution in May at the very, very latest. The board approved the safety target. We approved adopting and using CDOT safety target. Then the feds wanted a resolution stating that, so it went to the board as a consent item yesterday for them to sign the resolution. So that is finally all closed and put to bed. And, unfortunately, the CDOT safety target is accident rate is going up for the next couple of years before it goes down. Now, we can change the safety target. We can decide to develop our own next year on an annual basis. The bridge target is a 4-year target, and it can only be modified 2 years into the cycle. So if we decide to use CDOT, we're locked in for 2 years. So we will get into all of that kind of stuff and have to start having a discussion and recommendation for safety for all those other performance targets.
Is that all Policy Directive 14? Is that what all those measures are?
No, this is all federal. I don't think any of that's incorporated in Policy
Not at this
Directive
point.
14.
But they will be, because it's not
I
done
was
yet.
going to give an early look at them, but if they're not in there, I won't
Not yet.
bother.
They haven't got that far yet.
Okay, so at the March meeting, we'll be asked to recommend approval of the 19 and
draft tip.
2022 tip, right?
Mhm.
Okay. So if we all have any comments on the tip, now is the time to send
Now's
them
the
in to
time
you
to
all.
get them in.
Okay. All right. Any other items before we adjourn?
Our new executive director starts next Tuesday morning. I've got a meeting with him Wednesday afternoon. I won't let him out until he hires a new transportation director.
You go, Ken.
Today is the deadline for applications, and we did receive one more today, so
How many did you get all?
I don't know yet. They go to Barb, and I haven't worried about it. I won't worry about it until 5 o'clock today.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a good month. Well, and we'll see you in a week or so.
About 72 hours, is that what we're saying?
Did I run Lily off?
No, she has to go pick up her kids. And there's no
Well, that's
availability in
good
that corner.
excuse. She needs a toll lane.
She's
I know.
mom, so she's got to be particular.
I was thinking the exact same thing. About 2 minutes ago, you know what? I think going over there and having a beer is not a good idea. It's a good idea.
Good idea.
We had lunch across the street.
Toll lane out of mountains this last weekend. They cost her $6. $6 for more time well spent, she said.